So may I just hand you over then to Labour and Co-op MP for Liverpool West Derby and Shadow Education Secretary, Stephen Twigg.
Thank you very much. Helen, thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here with you today, and I want to start by saying something about the theme of this conference, because I think that innovation is just so vitally important. If we're going to see further improvement in our education system in the future, I think it is going to be led by people like yourselves. It's going to be led by the professionals who are working in the schools and in the classrooms, and unleashing the best of professionalism and the most exciting and innovative practice, I think, is going to be vitally important to the chances of that success in the future. Now, I'm going to speak mostly this afternoon about technology in our schools, and of course there is a rich heritage in this country. Helen and I have just been speaking about my school days, and I was at secondary school in the late 70s and early 1980s. I remember when computers started to arrive, when the school turned a classroom into a computer room, and as a rather naive teenager, I thought to myself, I wonder if this will catch on. And of course it did. Just over 3 decades ago, the invention of the BBC Micro as part of the BBC's computer literacy project heralded a revolution in digital learning, and many of our present-day technological elite in this country got their first taste for programming on the iconic brown and orange keyboard. And by the 90s, more than 1 million machines had been sold, and they'd become, of course, ubiquitous in classrooms across the country. And then, of course, we've seen the dominance of the PC running Microsoft programs that would end the BBC Micro's monopoly in our schools. Now, there is a certain irony that the advent of the personal computer with pre-installed software has led to something of a shift in learning away from the amateur classroom programmer to a generation of children brought up to learn ICT skills such as word processing and spreadsheets, from programming basic to just learning basic skills, a trend that has continued right up to the present day. Incredibly, the numbers of students in this country that take computing at A-level has been in steady decline over the past 15 years. In 1998, 12,500 A-level students took computing A-level. Last year, that figure was 3,400, and we face, therefore, a very real skills shortage as a country. Now, the government has made much of the UK tech city in Shoreditch in East London, and undoubtedly it is a welcome development. But our standing as a country, as a hub for innovation, is built on sand. If you look at the 6 London boroughs that have been identified by the Greater London Authority as having the highest concentration of tech companies, not just in this country, but in Europe, they only produced, altogether, across the 6 of them, 33 A-level students in computing last year. The unemployment rate in this country for graduates is around 10%, but for computer science graduates, it is almost double that, 17%, illustrating that we face a gap between the effectiveness of the training and education and the skills that our economy requires for today, let alone for tomorrow. Now, this, I think, is an issue of critical importance for our economic future. If you take a look at the Home Office's list of shortage occupations, what it shows you is that we are still having to import software developers and graphic designers in the visual effects industry from overseas. What is clearly needed is something of a revolution to get the homegrown talent to meet the needs of our economy today and tomorrow. My worry with the direction of the current government's education policy is that it is an outdated, backward-looking approach that doesn't meet the needs of children and young people today, and certainly doesn't rise to the challenges of the economy of tomorrow. And for me, that is typified by Michael Gove's English Baccalaureate. The designer behind the iPhone, Jonathan Ive, spoke out about this recently, and he said of the eBac, "It will fail to provide students with the skills that UK employers need, and its impact on our economy will be catastrophic." Now, I welcome the fact that the government has introduced a new computer science GCSE. However, while the new courses will come into place in September of next year, I'm not convinced that schools are ready for these new courses. For example, we don't have enough qualified teachers to teach the existing ICT courses, let alone the new computer science course. According to the Royal Society, 2/3 of teachers are not deemed to have sufficiently relevant qualifications for this new course. There is a real need here to improve the CPD of those teachers to ensure that they're ready to take on the challenges of this new curriculum. Now, I very much welcome the fact that Google have said that they will fund 100 STEM Teach First entrants. The government is establishing a Computing at School network of excellence, but there will only be 50 master computer science teachers. Many people are asking if that is going to be sufficient to address what is a very significant change in the curriculum. I also think it's important that we ensure that ICT doesn't wither on the vine. It is true to say that many students, many employers, indeed in my experience many teachers, were unimpressed with GCSE IT, that in many ways it was a proxy for office skills and often therefore pretty boring for the students. This was then exacerbated by inadequate careers advice and a lack of engagement from higher education. The government needs to address the issue of ensuring that ICT students are getting the basics that they need and that these are matched to what we need in our wider economy. Last September, when the Labour Party conference was here in this building, Ed Miliband spoke about the forgotten 50%, the young people who don't go on to university, and the failure of successive governments of both main parties to address their needs. And frankly, the contrast between this country and countries like Germany, Austria and Switzerland that have excellent systems of vocational as well as excellent systems of academic education. And we've put forward the idea of a gold standard technical baccalaureate for young people. Part of the challenge for the Tech Bac is to address the digital divide that exists between those doing academic and those doing vocational courses. We're looking at how we could get employers to accredit high-quality computing and ICT courses. As well as the big players like Google, Microsoft and Facebook, we want to work with homegrown companies like Codemasters, Imagination Technologies and Arm Holdings. We need to ensure that as well as providing a rigorous set of qualifications for those who want to be software developers, we are providing all young people with a firm grasp of how to use technology in everyday life and in the world of work. Of course, the majority of young people are not going to become computer programmers, but all of us interact with technology on a daily basis. And it's for this reason that I'm very concerned that the government's proposed new curriculum for schools removes reference to ICT from the English, maths and science curriculums at primary school. I think that is an example of what I see as a backward-looking and outdated approach. It is exactly these forms of cross-curricular learning that I think are critical for young people to succeed in the modern economy. An interesting example from which we can learn is the example of Israel, which faced very similar challenges 20-25 years ago. And in 1990, they decided to rewrite their computing and ICT curriculum. And they now have one of the most rigorous computer science high school programs in the world. In 2000, the Israeli government set up a national computer science teaching center as the professional home for all computer science teachers. It's a world-class institution that inspires a community of teachers to pursue continuous improvement. Of course, there are many exciting things happening in this country as well. I represent a constituency down the road from here in Liverpool, and the North Liverpool Academy is leading a group that is establishing a studio school on Merseyside that will specialise in the computer gaming and digital sectors. Video games contribute something like 300 million to the regional economy, providing more than 1,600 jobs. I also want to look at how we can encourage learning outside of school, learning outside of the classroom. Part of the impact of the BBC Micro came from the ability for children and young adults, mainly men at the time, to practice coding on their own at home. We need to think about how we can recreate the dynamism of the amateur programmer in the context of the 21st century. One of the things that I'm very keen to see established is a network of after-school clubs in computer programming to encourage young people to take up software development in their own time. Innovations such as the Raspberry Pi, which features at this event yesterday and today, should make this a relatively low-cost option, both for schools and for local authorities. And I think if our schools, as is so often the case, are sitting empty after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and a computer can be purchased for a modest sum, there is the potential for a huge return on investment in our technology sector. Research suggests that you could save around £25 million simply by shifting schools to cloud-based servers. That surely is the tip of the iceberg for the potential that technology has to deliver savings in education, as well as new approaches to teaching and learning. I visit schools every week in different parts of the country. I debate education policy in Parliament and in other forums. And one of the things that always strikes me and indeed frustrates me is that so much of our debate on education policy in this country is plagued by false choices. You can have high standards, or you can have inclusion for all children and young people. You can have a knowledge-based curriculum, or you can prepare young people for the skills that they need in the economy of the future. Now, the reality is that we need all of these things. Of course, we need high academic standards, but we also need inclusion for all young people. Of course, there is a core of knowledge that it's vital that young people have if they're to participate in our society, but there are vital skills that are needed to be active citizens and to get the jobs and establish the businesses of the future. And I think the changes that Michael Gove is proposing to the school curriculum illustrate another example of the negative impact of this false choice. Because yes, I do want young people to have a good knowledge of our history as a country, of course I do, but I also want young people to have the ability to analyse critically, to work as part of a team, to speak and listen, to present well, and I worry that those elements of our education system are being downgraded very significantly. Stephen Mastin, who is the head of history at a Cambridge school and worked as an advisor to Michael Gove on the proposed new history curriculum, said recently that the end product of that work bore, in his words, no resemblance to the drafts that he'd worked on as recently as last month. And he said that the proposed version that emerged failed tragically to offer children a broad and balanced education. Now, I cite that to make a broader point. I think politicians, myself included, need to step back from some of these areas. I think the curriculum and pedagogy in our schools are best led by the professionals rather than being led by the politicians. Now, sometimes when I say that, people say to me, that's a very easy thing to say as the shadow education secretary. The real test is whether you do that if you win and become the actual Secretary of State. And I take that point, it's a reasonable point for people to make. But I make it because I've been a minister in education. I've seen the education system change over the last 25 to 30 years. I've looked at the evidence from other countries, and everything to me points to that basic fact that we have too much chopping and changing, too much political interference in curriculum and pedagogy, and the countries that have succeeded are those that haven't had those elements, those that have forged a consensus between government and the education system with employers, and a cross-party consensus. And that is what I would like us to do. What that would mean is that we have a broad and balanced curriculum which develops both a core knowledge, which we do need, but also the transferable skills that young people need to succeed, both in education, in wider society, but also in the world of work. Another concern I have, and I'll draw to a close with this point, is that the direction of policy on schools, the focus on creating a market in our education system, has a very big downside. And that downside is that we've lost the focus on collaboration and cooperation that I think is vital if we're going to see school improvement in the future. Anyone working in technology will tell us that collaboration is critical to developing solutions to the challenges of the future. I think good schools, outstanding schools, should be sharing their best practice with other schools. I think it's good that schools have autonomy, have the ability to make decisions for themselves, free of undue interference from central government. But no school should be an island. In government, the Labour Party focused on collaboration. Our academy model, I know the previous debate was on academies and free schools, our academy model was about improving education in some of the poorest parts of the country, raising standards, but not about creating schools that were cut off from other schools and from the local community. The best academies are doing this, but very many great maintained schools are doing it as well, for example, through clusters, through federations, through other networks. I want to mention today the fantastic work that's done by the cooperative movement in education with co-op trust schools, co-op principles. Really, I think, should be at the heart of education policy for the future. So we need that collaboration between schools and their wider communities, including local authorities, but also of equal importance is collaboration between teachers. I've talked a lot about the importance of us learning from best practice, both in our own country and in other parts of the world. And if we look at countries like Finland and Japan that have placed teacher collaboration and teacher professionalism at the heart of their education policies, I think we can learn some really important lessons. I'm very supportive of the idea of establishing a Royal College of Teachers. That's about raising the status of the profession, but it's also about putting continuing professional development at the heart of future school improvement. When people say to me, what do we need to do to see schools improve in the future, I sometimes say CPD, CPD, CPD. I think it is such an important element of what needs to happen in the future, and why I regard an event like the one that you're taking part in here as being just so important. So sharing technology, spreading innovation and excellence are vital. We need to recapture the dynamism that was heralded with the advent of the BBC Micro, to inspire a generation of young people to become programmers, but also of equal importance to allow all young people to make the best of technology, including outside of the classroom. Let's learn from best practice. If it's in our own country, that's fantastic, but also learn from best practice in other parts of the world, and recognise that if we're going to drive standards up further, and we celebrate the success that schools and teachers have had in driving standards up over the last 10 to 15 years, the most important way we'll do that is through collaboration and teacher professionalism, not by recreating an old-fashioned curriculum. I think that's an agenda that can harness the power of technology and the power of innovation that can then see real further improvement in our education system. Thank you very much.